Hi, my name is Amy and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about what are pressure groups, and this is going to be the first of a series that I'm hoping to do, which is politics lessons. I studied politics A-level. I did my exams last year in 2019 and I loved it. If you're curious, I got an A-star. I found it so extremely interesting because before my A-level I wasn't very in the know with politics, and it allowed me to get more educated regarding how my voting intentions, how participation works, how I can participate in other ways than just voting, especially as someone who was under 18 and was just raring to go. When I was studying politics A-level, as much as I was enjoying it, it was very frustrating as we were the first cohort of politics A-level students in my school, and we were also the first year of the specification on the exam board. I was on edexcel. There was no resources apart from the textbooks, which were instantly out of date because the second you publish a textbook and then something happens, your textbook is out of date. So it was incredibly frustrating to not have any textbooks that were helpful or even any kind of online resources that were helpful. I mostly just used my lesson notes, did some of my own research, and I've kind of compiled this into a video, and I thought it'd be helpful for those who are studying politics A-level on edexcel, like me, like I was, if they are struggling or they just want further clarification on a topic, but also those who might just be generally interested. Today I'll be discussing pressure groups, which is considered a very heated topic at the moment because of the protests and demonstrations going on in both the US and the UK. For the UK politics exam, which is your first component of 3 components if you are studying, I'm going to keep saying it, but if you are studying A-level politics on the edexcel specification, you have 3 exams and your first one is UK politics, and it came up on both my UK and US papers, so I think the best place to start is to start with the definition. So a pressure group is an organised group that doesn't put someone up for an election, but instead seeks to influence governmental policies through a variety of methods. In the UK, our pressure groups can be divided into 3 main groups. Sectional groups. These groups promote interests of particular groups in society. Their memberships are often very limited and restricted. Can be in all sorts of sectors, but the main one that comes to mind is the CBI, which I'll go on to say, but it's the Confederation of British Industry. They influence a lot of governmental policy in terms of business. The second category that is important to note is a cause group, and these groups promote causes instead of one particular section of society like sectional groups, and they have a bit more of a broad membership, and usually these people who are members of the pressure group don't actually experience the issue themselves. For example, PETA and Shelter, which is a homeless charity. Finally, the last section, the last category, is social movement group, and these groups are a large group focused on specific social and political issues and attempt to encourage change, usually in legislation and policy, but can also be in other ways. An example of a social movement group, as is going on at the moment, is the Black Lives Matter movement. As I said, an example of sectional groups is the CBI, which is a Confederation of British Industry, and the website describes themselves as a non-for-profit membership organisation that speaks on behalf of 190,000 businesses, and it's also an insider group. This means that the CBI has direct links to the government, and it's incredibly influential on legislation. When you look at some of the past speeches from mostly Theresa May, I think is someone who works very close with them, you can see that the CBI will often sponsor and try and get their message across. They're often in select committees and stuff like that to try and influence legislation in a way that benefits their businesses and them as a company. In terms of some of the successes of the CBI, in their report title, which was called A Year of Impact Shaping Policy and Winning for Members, they discussed that they were on 20 ministerial groups in 2019 across 9 departments, and in 2019 had 167 mentions within the Houses of Parliament. An example of a cause group is PETA UK, and as I said, it stands for the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. They describe themselves as exposing animal suffering in laboratories, in the food industry, in the clothing trade, and in the entertainment industry. This group is also defined as an outsider group, and therefore they have less impact on policy than, for example, the CBI, as they don't have as close links to the government or specific MPs. On their website, under the header of Groundbreaking Victories for Animals in 2016, it details a lot of its accomplishments, for example, defeating a potentially disastrous factory farming proposal through thousands of PETA supporters voicing their objections. Finally, an example of a social movement group is Black Lives Matter UK, which builds power to bring justice, healing and freedom to Black people. This is another outsider organisation, which means that they don't have as close links to the government. They rely very heavily on social media, campaigns, petitions, donations, protests and demonstrations, as you will have seen over the last few weeks during the current wave of the Black Lives Matter movement and protests that are happening across 18 different countries. Pressure groups do have varying levels of success based on their methods, and this is how they're separated into whether they are a successful pressure group or an unsuccessful pressure group. And these groups, it details how much influence they can have on governmental policy and legislation. The most common form of protest and way of achieving influence on governmental policy is lobbying, and this is defined as direct contact with individual decision makers such as MPs and local representatives. When I was in year 12, we went and visited the Houses of Parliament, and we went to the central lobby, which when I looked at it I was like, oh, it's a lobby, cool. It was the main place where members of both houses could interact with their constituents and hear their concerns. It's not really as much anymore, with social media being such a prominent thing in our democracy, but back in the day it was an important thing. Another method that pressure groups often use is donations to political parties. If you are studying politics A-level like I did, one topic you will have to study is campaign finance for both the UK and the US. And I hated the topic in the UK and loved it in the US because there was more controversies and scandals. In the UK, it is legal to donate to a political party as long as it's declared. This is used by the Conservative Party in terms of businesses and corporations, whereas the Labour Party tend to rely more heavily on trade unions and other organisations that represent occupations. The issue with this method is that it often leads to donators expecting influence, but through the donation system it's not always guaranteed. Another method that pressure groups, usually outsider and social movement groups, tend to rely on is civil disobedience and illegal practices. The reasoning behind this method is to create enough issues in general society through disobedience and disturbance to force the governments to take action in order to create social harmony and end these things that are going on. For example, this is happening at the moment with the Black Lives Matter movement in the US. A lot of the looting of expensive companies under the title of merchandise can be replaced but lives cannot is an attempt to try and cause destruction and to make change happen. For your exam, you will need an example of in the UK to back up your points if you're writing an essay. And an example that I can give you is in 2006, the Animal Liberation Front created controversy following the arrest of an arsonist who tried to bomb a car belonging to the husband of Caroline Brooks. She was the director of a courier firm who works for Britain's biggest testing laboratory, and I'll link the article down below. Finally, one method that is used by more prestigious pressure groups is an attempt to create direct change in legislation through litigation and judicial reviews. An example of a court case endorsed by a pressure group is R, which is Miller. The R is the person bringing the claim forward. Miller versus Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, and this was endorsed by the Remain campaign following Brexit, basically. This case was where Gina Miller argued that the government may not initiate withdrawal from the EU by Article 50 of the Treaty of European Union without an Act of Parliament giving the permission to do so. However, it must be mentioned that although this one case shows that they were successful using litigation, it is a very unsuccessful method of attempting to enact change, and it's a very expensive process. Finally, now we've talked about the successive methods, the last thing that you would need to know about pressure groups in order to do your exam in UK politics is the other external influences on decision making, and this is in the form of think tanks, corporations and lobby firms. Think tank is a body of experts who provide advice and ideas on specific political issues. These groups of people are often used to give alternative expertise to government policy, as they are often more educated than MPs on their specific area of expertise. That's the point. They're brought in to try and give some legislation more validity, give some legislation more education so they can be more informed. Examples of think tanks include the Centre for Social Justice, which was set up by Ian Duncan Smith, Tim Montgomery and Philippa Stroud, who aim to put social justice at the heart of British politics. Interesting. A lobbying firm is a professional organisation that are paid to gain influence on behalf of clients over governmental agendas, and so they basically just lobby MPs in the interest of their clients and have more influence because they are usually prestigious names that the MPs will respect a bit more than just a simple pressure group. An example of a lobbying firm is Bell Pottinger, who were a multinational public relations, reputation management and marketing company who went into bankruptcy following a scandal caused by activities in South Africa, based on the narrative as described in the New York Times, which I'll link down below as well. A quote from this article, a couple of quotes. Whites in South Africa had seized resources and wealth while they deprived blacks of education and jobs. And it was also described as a white monopoly capital. There were calls of corruption further due to the ties to David Cameron and therefore the effect on legislation. Finally, corporations are considered to have an influence on political decisions and legislation through a wide range of scandals. There is many reported scandals through corporations and how it's affected by governmental policy, one of the most being through taxation and corporate tax and stuff like that, including Google and Starbucks, who both got in trouble for this very recently. Another scandal that shows how corporations have control over democracy more than the average voter, and the governmental agenda is Virgin Rail, where they lobbied the government to change the Southern Rail, they'd had like a voting thing because the Southern Rail had recently been privatised. They had like a voting thing of which company could buy the Southern Rail, and Stagecoaches originally won, and then Virgin Rail lobbied the government into changing to them, which is not very democratic. Anyway, my camera's blinking at me, and that is all I have to say about UK pressure groups. I hope you enjoyed. If there is any topics that you want me to cover on UK politics exam or the US politics exam or the UK government exam, then let me know. There is also 4 ideologies that you do need to know. But one of them is I did nationalism, and there's like 5 other ones that you can study, so I'm a little bit shakier on them, but I might do some research, we'll see. If you enjoyed, please give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you all soon. Bye!